The first sign of trouble was not a sound, it was a smell. Ali, a farmer from a small village in central Anatolia, woke before dawn as usual. But this morning the familiar scent of damp earth and his wife Fatma's slowly baking bread was tainted. A sharp, acrid smell pricked his nostrils. It was the smell of burning. Not the comforting smoke of a hearth, but something vast, uncontrolled. He sat bolt upright on his simple sleeping mat, his heart suddenly a frantic bird trapped in his chest. He crept to the small unglazed window of his mud-brick home. The pre-dawn sky, usually a soft grey, pulsed with an angry orange glow to the east. It was in the direction of the larger village of Akpinar, a few hours' walk away. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through him. This was no accidental fire. This was the work of men. Raiders, perhaps, or worse, a disciplined army on the move, foraging and leaving destruction in their wake. His village, nestled in a shallow valley, had always felt somewhat protected. But that illusion was shattering with the rising, terrible light. He had to wake Fatma and the children. He had to think. The village elder, Ibrahim, would need to be consulted. Decisions had to be made, and quickly. Would they flee to the hills, or would they try to hide, hoping the storm would pass them by? Each option carried its own terrible risks. The red rooster, a symbol of dawn, seemed to crow a warning of blood this morning. Ali quickly roused Fatma. Her eyes, still soft with sleep, widened in terror as he explained what he saw and smelled. Before that dreadful morning, Ali's life, like that of most peasants in the vast Ottoman Empire, was one of relentless cyclical toil. His days were governed by the sun and the seasons, not by clocks or calendars in the way we understand them. He would rise before the sun painted the sky, his first prayers offered as the world around him slowly awoke. His home was simple, built from sun-dried mud bricks and timber with a packed earth floor. It usually consisted of 1 or 2 rooms, shared with Fatma, Hassan and Asa. The land was everything. Ali worked a small plot, officially owned by the Sultan, but granted to a local cavalryman, a sipahi, in return for military service. Ali, as a tenant farmer, or a chefji, had the right to cultivate this land and pass it to his son as long as he paid his dues and kept it productive. His main crops were wheat and barley, the staples of their diet. The village was the center of Ali's world. It was a small cluster of houses, perhaps a simple mosque if it was large enough, a communal well, and the surrounding fields and pastures. Social life revolved around family, neighbors, and shared work. Marriages were arranged, often between families within the same village or nearby settlements, strengthening community bonds. Children were a blessing, seen as future helpers on the farm and support in old age. From a young age, Hassan would help Ali in the fields, learning the skills passed down through generations. Isa would assist Fatma with household chores, preparing for her own future role. Faith played a crucial role in daily existence. The call to prayer 5 times a day from the nearest mosque, or simply observed in the fields, structured the day. One of the constant pressures in Ali's life was taxation. The Ottoman Empire, a vast military and administrative machine, needed significant resources to function. Much of this burden fell on the shoulders of the peasantry, the riaya. There were numerous types of taxes, and they could be complex and heavy. The most regular was the land tax, known as sift resmi for Muslim peasants like Ali. This was a fixed annual due for the right to cultivate his plot of land, the kiftlik. This tax was often collected by the local sipahi, the cavalryman who held the timar land grant that included Ali's farm. The sipahi, in turn, was supposed to use this income to equip himself for war and serve the Sultan. However, the system wasn't always fair or efficient. Famine was a recurring nightmare for Ali and his community. The 17th century, sometimes called part of the Little Ice Age, experienced climatic instability that could lead to poor harvests. A drought could wither the young wheat in the fields. Too much rain at the wrong time could cause crops to rot or make harvesting impossible. A harsh, long winter might kill livestock and deplete stored food supplies before the new growing season began. When the harvest failed, the consequences were dire. The delicate balance of subsistence living was easily upset, tipping families into a desperate struggle for survival. When food became scarce, Prices in local markets, if there was anything to sell, would skyrocket beyond the reach of ordinary peasants. Ali's family, like others, would first rely on their own stored reserves. They always tried to keep some grain from the previous harvest, carefully stored in clay bins or underground pits, to protect it from pests and moisture. But these reserves could only last so long. If one bad harvest was followed by another, the situation became critical. They would start by eating less, rationing every morsel. The Ottoman Empire in the 17th century was almost constantly at war. Conflicts raged on multiple fronts, with the Habsburgs in Europe, with Venice over control of the Mediterranean, with Poland, and with Safavid Persia in the east. For Ali, living in his Anatolian village, these wars often started as distant rumors. News would arrive slowly, carried by traveling merchants, soldiers, or government officials. He might hear that the Sultan had called his armies together, or that a new campaign was being launched. Initially, the direct impact might seem minimal, but the ripples would eventually reach even remote villages. One of the first signs was increased taxation. Wars were incredibly expensive. The state needed money for soldiers' pay, weapons, supplies, and logistics. This meant the avarice taxes, those extraordinary levies, became more frequent and heavier. Demands for grain, animals, and fodder for the army would increase. The abstract fear of war became terrifyingly real when the conflict arrived at Ali's own village. This could happen if the Ottoman frontiers were breached by an enemy army, or during periods of internal rebellion, like the Selali uprisings, which had scarred Anatolia in earlier decades of the 17th century. The news of an approaching enemy force, or even uncontrolled bands of deserters or bandits flourishing in the chaos of war, would spread panic. Scouts from the village might bring confirmation, their faces grim. They are coming, they are burning villages. This was the moment Ali had dreaded since that morning of the orange sky. The first instinct was often to flee. If there was enough warning, villagers would gather what few valuables and food they could carry and head for safer, more defensible locations. This usually meant the hills or mountains, dense forests, or fortified towns, if any were accessible. Leaving their homes, fields, and most of their possessions behind was a heartbreaking decision. The journey itself was fraught with danger. When faced with the immediate threat of invasion or rampant soldiery, Ottoman peasants like Ali developed various strategies for survival, honed by generations of experience in a volatile world. The most common tactic, as mentioned, was flight. Knowing the local terrain intimately was a huge advantage. Secret paths, hidden caves in the hills, or dense remote forests could offer temporary refuge. Villagers often had pre-arranged meeting points. If they had to scatter, they would take only essential supplies, some grain, dried fruit, water skins, and perhaps a few tools or a weapon for defense if they had one. If flight was impossible or deemed too risky, hiding was the next best option. People would conceal themselves in cellars, especially dug pits, or even within haystacks or dense bushes. Surviving the horrors of war, famine, and crushing taxes was a testament to the incredible resilience of 17th century Ottoman peasants like Ali. When the immediate danger passed and the invaders or raiders moved on, they would emerge from their hiding places or return from their flight to scenes of devastation. Homes might be burned, fields trampled, livestock gone, and granaries empty. The grief for lost loved ones, for their shattered lives and livelihoods, must have been overwhelming, yet somehow they found the strength to begin again. The first task was to salvage what they could. They would search through the ruins of their homes for any usable items. They would assess the damage to their fields and try to replant if the season allowed, perhaps with faster growing crops if their main harvest was lost. Neighbors helped each other to rebuild, sharing tools, labor, and any remaining food. The bonds of community, tested so severely, often became even stronger in the aftermath of such disasters. They had to.